Does Zambia need the IMF? Has been the burning question that the majority of people have been asking. And just recently, last month to be specific, the IMF Executive Board did conclude its Article 4 consultation and the review, the fifth review of the Extended Credit Facility 38-month program that gives Zambia access to 184 million United States dollars, which obviously will provide some relief, especially looking at Zambia's fiscal challenges. Today, we'll be looking and, of course, answering that pertinent question. And of course, to be able to provide us with some nitty gritties of this particular credit extended facility program that Zambia is on with the International Monetary Fund, I'm joined by no other than the resident IMF representative in this particular country. And this is no other than Eric Lautier. Eric, you're welcome to the People's Space podcast.
Thank you, Winston. I'm very happy to be here. It's my first podcast, actually, so I'm quite excited. But welcome to the IMF office here in Zambia.
Thank you very much. And we are privileged and excited as well to be among the very first people to be able to interact with you, especially on this important subject. And for those of you that follow our conversations, you might want to know that recently Cabinet did also approve an extension of the extended credit facility of the IMF in Zambia for a 12-month period. So obviously this conversation has come at a very, very timely period. Now, Eric, we've got a tradition on the People's Space podcast. You know, we're not only interested in what you have to tell us or what you know, but we're also interested in you as a human being. So before we get into the policy conversations, first of all, we'd like to know a little bit about you. Who is Eric? You know, just a little bit about your personal life, your career. What has really shaped the approach that you have to working with and in development countries like Zambia? That's what I want to know.
Thank you. Well, what you have to know about me is that I'm a bit of an economic geek. Like I love my job and I'm very passionate about it. But before joining the IMF, I served as an ODI fellow in Burundi. ODI fellows, basically we're financed by the ODI Institute, which is a UK-based institute, and they send young economists like me at the time inside ministries of finance, central bank, and so on to work from within the institution. So I was working within the Ministry of Finance with my Burundian colleagues, and as a young economist at the time, I was exposed to the multiple shocks that a country like Burundi face, and the stark limitation in both the financial resources and the institutional capacity that they have to respond to those. And, it was quite a eye-opening experience in terms of the complexity of policymaking in such a complicated setup. And I still remember actually like sitting on the Burundian side of the table. So there was the IMF mission coming to the country, and I was sitting with my Burundian colleagues, and I could see the gap between some of the fund expectations at the time and the realities my Burundian colleagues had to respond to those because of local political or institutional constraints. It didn't prevent them from committing to the reforms, even though that would be pretty tough to achieve. But it left me with a deeper understanding of the pressure those policymakers face, right? And I think what shaped this was essentially I understood the importance of frank, open dialogue, and I think we have this with the Zambian government, but we really need to have this kind of like empathy for the constraint the policymaker face. And I think the institution of the IMF has also evolved in that direction. I think I remember the previous MD, Christine Lagarde. She used to say that the IMF role is to bring a wallet, a brain, and a heart. And I think it's exactly right. I think, the wallet is our financing, and we provide financing in concessional loans, so zero interest rate, near zero interest rate for low-income countries. That acts as a shock absorber, essentially. So it gives the economy the breathing space to, gradual recover from the crisis. The brain, is the economic analysis and the policy advice. This is backed by technical assistance also. That's, help countries implement the reforms, whether it's to create jobs, keep price stable, reduce inequality, and so on. And finally, the art. And the heart is our concern for the people. I mean, to be honest, this is why I'm so passionate about this job. We know the choice the government have to make in those difficult times
Mhm.
are very painful. And so we place a strong emphasis in fairness and protecting the most vulnerable during those adjustments. So, it's a privilege to be that.
I love the fact that you've mentioned open dialogue and being frank. Obviously, these are key elements of ensuring that implementation of programs such as the extended credit facility are successful. But working in Africa, how has your experience been? Burundi, integrating with the people, learning about the local culture, and also apart from you know you being the IMF resident representative in Zambia. Eric is a human being. You're not just this economist, this finance guy. And French people love their football. French people love their music and all these other things that you guys do. So,
So-
what are some of the hobbies and stuff
That I
that you
do.
do when you're not looking at the economics of Zambia, Burundi, and all these other added responsibilities that you have?
Oh, you're right. I mean, first I must bring my condolences for the Chipolopo.
No, we accept them. We accept.
Sorry. But what do I mean? Well, to be very frank with you, this is a very intense job. So I do not have that much free time. But when I do, of course, I love live music. I play saxophone. I run a lot. I like running. I mean, your country is so beautiful. The weather is so fantastic. So being outside, just in the nature is just, a privilege. And I've lived a long time in Africa. I lived in Burundi, then I lived 5 years in Tanzania. I was working in Tanzania before. And now I come back to Zambia. And I don't know, I just, enjoy life, the people, the culture. It's just, it's a fantastic opportunity.
Interesting. As we transition, obviously, to our conversation, looking at the extended credit facility program, the focus of this initiative that is obviously aimed at ultimately helping Zambia achieve, fiscal restoration and stability, and also debt sustainability. What are some of the 2 or 3 headline targets that you can tell us that have been achieved so far, half into this program, and maybe why?
Yeah, so the current program basically focused on a few pillars, 3 main pillars. But the first was that given the situation that we were in, like basically Zambia had defaulted on its external debt, the focus was on restoring debt sustainability by promoting a significant fiscal consolidation and advancing on the debt restructuring talks, right? So when a country is working on restoring debt sustainability, first you need to run a positive primary balance. What that means is basically government revenues cover their day-to-day spending. So it's not boring just to keep the light on, if you want. So it's not just boring to pay civil servants wage, or schools or hospitals and so on. Second, they need to avoid costly external borrowing. So that helps keep the debt service manageable. So that's why they rely instead on more affordable financing from the IMF or the World Bank. The World Bank provided a lot of grant support, so that's essentially free. The IMF provides financing at 0% interest rate, so there's there's no other international lenders that provide such a cheap cost of financing, and we provide this to give the country that breathing space to recover. But in order to restore debt sustainability, we have to agree on some headline targets with the government, right? So that means that we agree on a primary fiscal balance targets every review, and on limits on non-concessional borrowing. So basically, the government now should not contract any expensive external debt. So we've seen in terms of the fiscal consolidation, like really significant progress. The primary balance between the period of 2018 to 2021 averaged a deficit of 4%, meaning that the government was borrowing to keep the light on, essentially. And then now, since the program started, we moved to a fiscal surplus of 0.6% of GDP in 2023. So that's positive surplus. And in 2024 of 2.9% of GDP. So we really are kind of like holding the right path in terms of the fiscal consolidation to bring the country back to a sustainable debt trajectory. And that kind of fiscal consolidation, it also helps the external investors, creditors, and so on, to see that the country is committed to live, within its means, essentially, but like to have this commitment to proper fiscal management and budget credibility. Another aspect of the program was to help the authorities to build external buffer. So that's what we call, gross international reserves. That was to ensure that Zambia has the resilience to face any other external shocks, and hopefully not with the help of the IMF, but on its own. So we continue to agree with the central bank on setting international reserve target, net international reserve targets that we assess at every review. And then, of course, the authorities have to also refrain from engaging in monetary financing of the budget. So basically, that means that when the central bank is providing or printing money to finance the budget, so that is not allowed under the program, and it should not be, it should not be in place because it makes the conduct of monetary policy very, very complicated. But we also have, consultation with the government on monetary policy to ensure price stability, to keep inflation down. So that's what we call under the program an inflation consultation clause, and that kind of aim at keeping inflation low and helping the central banks think about how to bring price down. And then, of course, those quantitative targets, that's basically, those targets that we fix with the government at every review. Those targets are also coupled with some structural reforms that helps strengthen the institutions or the way, the fiscal and the monetary frameworks are set up to solidify the gains that we have achieved so far. So on the spending side, reforms have been focusing on reducing inefficient spending or inefficient like fuel subsidies, for example, but also reforming other subsidies like the FISIP subsidy. So we've moved towards the e-voucher, and that will be rolled out to every district this season. But going forward, because the program continues, there's reform of the FRA Act to ensure that the agency just focus on strategic food reserve, that it buys at market price, it intervenes only when it's needed. Also reforms around the Agricultural Marketing Act to ensure that there's a public-private oversight of the policy decision that happens in the agricultural sector. And also reforms to the Agricultural Credit Act, which essentially will allow farmers to use warehouse receipt, like the receipt from the warehouse,
warehouse receipting system,
to unlock loans from banks and grow their own business. We also have some reform on the Banking and Financial Service Act. So that's basically trying to make the financial sector legal framework stronger, from licensing and ownership change to corporate governance, auditing, supervision, early intervention, resolution, and so on. So it's like there's a lot of work going on the financial supervision side as well. So this is, for the targets that we kind of like targeting for end of September. We also have another target on the anti-corruption front. So here, there is an amended act that will make the Anti-Corruption Commission more independent, more accountable. It will open the selection process for the board and the director general. It will involve independent experts from civil society, better align Zambian laws with UN Convention Against Corruption. So basically, ensuring that the fight against corruption is independent and offenses are criminalized and that penalties are strong enough to deter people to engage in corrupt activities. So that revised law should be submitted in Parliament, I think, in September this year. So we're also kind of like helping the authority think about how to make sure that all the necessary, um, element of that laws are in place to guarantee the independence of the Anti-Corruption Commission.
I get excited, when I hear things like you're explaining, especially when it comes to strengthening the institutional framework surrounding the fight against anti-corruption. And there has been strong advocacy centering on ensuring that we promote autonomy, which you said, you are pushing the agenda of. So are we likely to see a situation where things like, I just want us to put it in black and white, where we don't see the DG, being appointed by the powers that be, because that leaves the institution susceptible to political influence. If I'm the guy that's, either the board chairperson or whoever, and I don't like you, Eric, I'll just tell my guy behind the camera and say, dude, can you go and investigate Eric? And before long, so it sort of compromises the fight and the institution still likes. So are we going to see major reforms pointing explicitly to that?
But that's the goal. So this is the goal of the revision of that Anti-Corruption Act. And this is what we expect with our discussion with the government as the final result, to guarantee the independence of the anti-commission corruption. So yes, so we continuing work towards this, right? And so the law will be finalized very shortly and then submitted in Parliament in September. We are continuing engagement on this, and so
you've worked in Burundi,
yeah,
you've worked in Tanzania, and now you're in Zambia. And I'm tempted to ask this question. You come from Europe, African governments normally have a tendency to fail to live within our means. We have a tendency to struggle with fiscal discipline. From all these areas where you've gone, from your experience, now I'm just drawing from your experience, where do you think the problem is? Is there enough, is there enough political will and willingness, drawing from your experience in all these countries, to really get to a place where we can be fiscally disciplined and stable enough?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm really more focused on Zambia right now, so I cannot talk about what's happening in the other countries. But the way the IMF support those governments in terms of like ensuring that fiscal discipline stays is through providing, both technical assistance, right, in terms of like having medium-term fiscal framework, having like medium-term revenue strategies. But also, you can work toward like fiscal rules. So the government of Zambia actually, is very interested on our support. And we had a mission a month ago, so a technical assistance mission that came, a whole team that came to help the Ministry of Finance thinking about fiscal rules. So what do you do with, the endowment that Zambia has? How do you ensure that there's a fair kind of like, allocation between generations? Because the copper and the gold that is being extracted from Zambia today belongs to your grandchildren. It belongs to everyone, every Zambian, right? So you need to make sure that that wealth contributes to the development of Zambia. So, it's like we're helping the government like with fiscal rules. So kind of like, okay, do you need to save some of the extra, let's say if the price go up to a certain, threshold, do you need to save that surplus for the next generation? Or do you invest it in, priority sectors, road, infrastructure? So this is the whole kind of like debate that, is ongoing, and this is the government decision. So they are thinking about those fiscal rules.
Earlier on, you mentioned, the important role that the IMF has made when it comes to bringing Zambia on the right path to fiscal restoration and stability. And building on that, we've seen that Zambia did achieve some milestones when it comes to, debt restructuring. And the conversation that came with that success story is the issue of striking a balance between, investment in sectors, talking about social sectors, schools, health, and all these, vis-a-vis making sure that, we are on the right path when it comes to fiscal consolidation, which is the target. Your thoughts on that? How do we balance that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very important question. You know, the debt is restricted, right? So it's not forgiven.
Mm.
So it's not like what happened.
Very, very important. Restructured, but not forgiven.
Yeah, it's not what happened in the HIPIC
Yeah.
in 2000. So the restructured debt, it's much lower, but it still has to be paid. So for Zambia to meet its development ambition, it needs a budget that works for today, but is also sustainable for tomorrow, right?
Mhm.
So that means that you need to keep the debt on a manageable path,
Mhm.
and ensuring that the country can continue to meet its obligation. So that's including debt service,
Mhm.
but also, you don't want to crowd out other essential spending like infrastructure, education, hospital, and so on. So this can be done in several ways, right? Like I was mentioning a bit earlier that there was fiscal consolidation. So basically, like it's rationalizing and reprioritizing some of the spending. And I think this has been done very well in Zambia, where we kind of like, remove some of the ineffective spending or the less and very expensive subsidies to reallocate to social spending and health and education. A lot of teachers, a lot of health workers have been hired. This is essentially a direct kind of like consequence of like reallocating those ineffective subsidies. But you there's not there is so you can cut a bit of the spending, but you cannot compress. There's so much you can go there, right? Like at some point, you cannot compress more, and so raising more revenue here is essential. So the revenue mobilization is the most sustainable way for Zambia to fund its own development. I mean, it's your own revenue, so you do whatever you want with the revenue, and it's sustainable because it doesn't depend on what happened in the international stage or whether bilateral lenders, so you need those own revenue coming from the Zambian, uh, economy, right? So here, we have a sharp focus on improving tax compliance, reducing tax exemptions, simplifying the tax system so that it makes revenue collection fairer, more progressive, and more effective. So we work with the Zambian revenue authorities. We provide a lot of technical assistance, including on the medium-term revenue strategy. We also do, more kind of like technical administrative upgrades around setting up a large taxpayer unit or the smart invoice, as you probably know. So there's a lot of like work that is ongoing to help and improve the capacity of the Zambian Revenue Authority to mobilize those revenue. But of course, a lot of work remains to be done, and we're continuing to support.
Just a follow up quickly. If you look at the Zambian business landscape, we have the majority of commercial activity in the informal sector as opposed to the formal sector, and much of the burden when it comes to tax remission solely hinges on the formal sector. In your technical assistance to the Zambia Revenue Authority, is this an area that you are perhaps also exploring? And is it even possible, by the way, to be able to say, extract as much as we can from the informal sector?
Well, it's very difficult, right? Because first you have to get the informal economy somehow in the tax net, right?
Mhm.
And it's a very complicated. It's complicated to do.
Mhm.
It also rely on very many different dimensions.
Mm.
So one is if you want the informal sector to start formalizing itself, it needs to have an incentive to go into the formal economy,
Mhm.
right? You're not going to formalize yourself
Yeah.
if you know that ZRA is then going to go after you, right?
Mhm.
So you need to convince the informal sector that by entering the formal economy, you will get access to more financing, to more training, to an easier way of doing business. So it's more about making the system
Mhm.
easier, the business climate more friendly, cutting the red tape, im- making the licensing requirement much easier, and then of course supporting this with more access to finance. Um, and when you do those things, then yes, you create an incentive for the informal sector to enter the formal economy, and then you can raise more taxes. But it's very hard to do. And I think the research actually shows that it's not really about the very small businesses like the informal traders at Commerce Market and so on. It's more about formalizing the more bigger value added kind of
Value addition, yeah.
activities. So that's important.
See you after the break. Welcome back to People Space Podcast. Today we are looking at the IMF in Zambia with a special focus on the extended credit facility program that Zambia is currently on. And of course, endeavoring to understand the program, looking at some successes and challenges, and just basically discussing the possibility of interrogating whether this particular program might just take Zambia to the promised land, which is, of course, achieving fiscal stability and debt sustainability, as has been the aim of the International Monetary Fund in this particular country as it offers its technical assistance and other areas. And my guest is Eric Lautier, who is the IMF resident representative in Zambia. So getting into our conversation, Eric, one of the things that has dominated conversation with regards the International Monetary Fund in this country has always been the issue of conditions. I liked the three-prong approach that you mentioned earlier on with the IMF, the issue of the wallet, the heart. And the heart aspect is one element that people have not particularly associated the IMF with. The IMF come with these conditions that make it very expensive, especially when it comes to the cost of living. And in this case, we are looking at some of the issues to do with fuel subsidy, which was again dominating conversation in this country. So how do we make sure that the vulnerable Zambians, as Zambia sits on this program, are protected?
Yes, I mean it's a very good question. When the IMF arrives in a country, we arrive in a time of crisis, right? So that means that there were some policies in place that preceded the crisis that led to this crisis. So when we come into the country, we try to address those issues so that we can focus on restoring macroeconomic stability. And the Zambian program is based on three pillars. So I mentioned that earlier, but the second pillar is increasing social spending and improving the targeting of social spending to ensure that the most vulnerable gets the support they need. Of course, we want more support, but as part of the targets that we set with the government, we have a floor on social spending. So that basically is a nominal floor under which the government commit every review to not go under. So it's a minimum level of social expenditure that they have to do, even when they're making difficult budgetary adjustment. So this is basically the goal here is to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected, right? And I think this was largely achieved under this program, even though poverty remains high in Zambia, as you know. And there is a very, there's still much more work that needs to be done towards inclusive growth. But social spending as a share of GDP has more than doubled under this program. So it was 0.7% of GDP in 2020, and it was now 1.7% in 2024. And there is plans to reach 1.9% in 2025. So we're really helping the government to increase social spending under the program. And as I was mentioning, this was made possible because we were shifting resources from ineffective regressive subsidies like the fuel subsidies, because the fuel subsidies benefit the wealthier part of the population more than the most vulnerable that don't have big cars, big house, and consume fuels. Of course, those more vulnerable people, when there is an increase in fuel prices, they have less capacity to absorb that shock because they have less disposable income, right? So that's why it's so important to work on social cash transfer and social spending to ensure that the impact of those reforms are cushioned by more social spending so that, every support is more targeted and reach the people in need. that also free up some resources for free education. So free public education has now brought over 2 million children into school. This was also backed by hiring of more than 42,000 teachers since 2021. So there is a lot of like additional support and like good spending that is done by the government that was made possible because of this reallocation on cutting regressive expensive subsidy towards more productive use. So even with an overall budget cut, I think of 1.9% of GDP in 2024, the government spent about 54 billion kwacha on social spending. And the plan is to increase this to 60 billion in 2025. So, it's not just number. It means that more people can get access to social cash transfer and social spending. Also, when the drought hit last year, we at the IMF, we boosted the financing, right? So we increased the quota that Zambia has access to. So we put the program from $1.3 billion to $1.7 billion. And we disbursed that support all at once last year in June. That was aiming to bring more financing, which is again at zero interest rate, to the government so that they can respond to the crisis. And so with the support of other institutions like the World Bank, this helped increase the social cash transfer program and extend it, right? So there was this emergency social cash transfer. So it was expanded to 1.3 million households, and the benefit doubled, right? So this is a direct impact of the work of the IMF and the World Bank providing the financing to the government to help with cushioning the impact of the crisis.
When we talk about expanding the fiscal buffer from a revenue perspective, obviously conversations such as diversifying beyond copper come into play. And one of the things that we'd like to find out from you as the International Monetary Fund is on the aspect of diversification. What role does the IMF see critical segments of our population that fall under the brackets of SMEs, women in entrepreneurship and business, and youth-led business and entrepreneurial initiative play when it comes to achieving this goal of expanding the revenue buffer for the country?
I mean, they absolutely are essential. I mean, the fascinating thing about Zambia is like you have such a young population, right? But this also comes with a condition or a kind of a condition. Basically, you have 400,000 young people entering the job markets every year, so you need to provide jobs for those people. And yes, SMEs absolutely, like with the right support, they will be that powerful engine of job creation, particularly in high potential sectors such as agribusiness, tourism, mining services, green energy, and so on. But the success of those SMEs or how to improve, and make the pie grow depends on building the foundation they need, which is skills, which is access to finance, access to markets, and so on. So, we just had this, the last review, as you mentioned, the fifth review, that was also an article formation. And basically what article formation means is, as a shareholder of the IMF, Zambia commits to have article formation coming, every year or so, or every 2 years, or 18 months, I think. But they help us. I mean, those article formation essentially help us think a bit more deeply about medium-term issues. And as part of this article formation, we publish some what we call selected issue paper, where we look a bit more deeply at like some thematics. So it's available online. Everyone can Google, selected issue paper Zambia IMF. They will find it on Google. But basically, there was one paper when we looked at strengthening the labor market productivity to support growth and structural transformation in Zambia. And essentially in that paper, we kind of like encourage reforms around technical and vocational training, so that, you have more professional training that is short, it's modular, it's aligned with what the market actually demands in terms of skills. And it also, should enable informal workers to, many of them are women and youth, to upgrade their skills while, not stepping away from the livelihoods they currently make, right? So you need that flexibility to help to bridge that gap between education and employment, right? And so this is important, the training, but also access to finance is another key barrier, right? Like if you ask SMEs or businesses what their main constraint for more growth is, they will tell you access to finance. And there, there's a lot of work that is going on, including, work with the central bank and so on, where they expand credit guarantee schemes. There's also other ways that finance can reach entrepreneurs through mobile money platforms or group lending models and so on. But ultimately, what you want to have in Zambia is a deeper capital markets, more bank competition, so that they compete to lend to the promising businesses. But you also want to expand tool that helps reduce the risk. So that means like collateral registries, warehouse receipt. So that's some of the reform with the Agri-Market Act. But credit bureau that helps also catalog the bad payers, so that banks don't lend to people that don't repay their loan and so on. So there's a few aspects that needs to be done there. Also, financing coupled with mentorship, that also can be a powerful cocktail for success, right? And when the deputy managing director of the IMF visited Zambia a few months ago, we got to meet the bright minds at Bongo Hive. I don't know if it's a tech startup incubator. And honestly, I was amazed by the brilliant businesses there. I mean, the entrepreneurship, the drive, and the very effective solution that they propose. I mean, it was really impressive. And we need more of this in Zambia. Like this is exactly the way to go, because you have many promising businesses that they stay informal, and that limit their access to finance. As we were mentioning, it limits access to markets, limits access to government support. So we need more of this, and you don't have to be the next Facebook to ask for help. I mean, for example, now with the rollout of the e-venture reform, you have more agribusiness coming, right? Because the private sector is now in charge of distribution, right? So we estimated with the last year reform, there's more than 200 new agribusiness that were created because now they do the distribution of the agricultural inputs. That's not a new business in Zambia, right? But those guys will need training on financial literacy, on keeping books together, so that banks are more willing to lend to them. So there's a lot, but then of course there is need for improvement in business climates, simplifying the licensing, the government procedures, applying regulation consistently, cutting the red tape. All these things that will reduce uncertainty, reduce costs for making or doing business in Zambia, and attract both domestic and foreign investors. And maybe one last one, because it's maybe, but it's also important to level the playing field between state-owned enterprises and the private sector, right? Because ideally, you don't want a system where SOEs have preferential access to finance or foreign exchange or all these things. You want to have a fair playing field, and in that aspect, we did assist the government in adopting an SOE policy, so a state-owned enterprise policy, which among other things, it tried to improve financial performances of SOEs, to try to enhance their ability to generate revenues. The authorities are also developing an SOE Act, which is in line with that policy, and that means that you want stronger SOEs with better governance, independent boards, transparent account, publishing their own financial accounts, so that it reduces the fiscal risk and open space for private investment.
When you look at a country like Zambia, and still on the issue of trade and business and entrepreneurship, Zambia affiliates to SADC, which obviously comes with certain protocols whose aim is to promote trade facilitation and integration. And we also are party to the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, another initiative that is meant to boost trade and ultimately revenue for the country. How is the IMF supporting trade facilitation and value chain development vis-a-vis these regional and continental protocols?
Well, I think here you're trying to give us or to expand our portfolio even further than it currently is. So we focus on macro stability. We focus on ensuring the stability of the external balances, right? We do through structural reforms reach other sectors like mining, agriculture, energy, and so on. But we don't really work at the moment on trade facilitation. I mean, this is the kind of this is more the realm of the World Bank, and they have teams here, and they are very capable specialists on this. So we leave it. We leave that to the World Bank.
Okay. Interesting, interesting. Now, when we talk about engagement, earlier on you had mentioned, as we obviously get to wrapping up our conversation, when we talk about engagement with the public and making sure that you bridge this information gap that exists between the IMF being perceived as this entity that doesn't care, has hidden agendas, and just comes to impose, or their work ultimately comes to impose these harsh conditions. What is that one simple message, that you would share to the citizens? Are you guys open to the Zambian citizens, for example, if they wanted to understand what it is that the IMF does when it comes to engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for everyone to understand, and this was very clear from the start, that this is Zambian program. This is the program of Zambia. This is not reforms that the IMF is pushing on Zambia, but the reforms that you have in the IMF programs are all in the 8th National Development Plan. So this is reforms that the Zambian people have agreed to do. But we at the IMF, Zambia is a shareholder of the IMF. So we are here to serve the Zambian people. We actually work for you. So we share the same goal. Like, we want a stronger economy. We want an economy that creates jobs, that brings investments and opportunity for every Zambian. This is what we want. This is your program. So every reform we discuss with the government, every analysis we produce, everything is publicly available. It's online. You can Google IMF Zambia staff report, and you will have all the staff report. We have all the numbers, all the discussions there. The commitments that the government makes towards the board of the IMF is also summarized in what we call the Memorandum of Economic and Financial Policy. This is also included in our staff report. So, I encourage every Zambian to go online, read them. I mean, if possible, and reach out. If you have any questions, this is the Zambian office of the IMF. It's for everyone.
You've talked about, the staff reports and everything, and one of the indications that we got, from the consultation for review meetings and everything is that Zambia's performance under the ECF is satisfactory. So obviously, we would want to find out, how optimistic are you when it comes to, Zambia's economic future prospects?
Well, what keeps me optimistic about Zambia, it's both your resilience and your potential. I think the country has abundant natural resources, and you have a young and dynamic population. You have a lot of very smart, hardworking Zambians. And I think this will become a strong base of entrepreneurs and innovators that will bring the right solution for Zambia if the right conditions are created. But I've also seen the determination of policymakers here in Zambia, and they're really committed to tackle difficult reforms, make the difficult choice and the right choice. So that also filled me with confidence. I think with that stability, if it's maintained and if the effort on the reforms is sustained, I think Zambia has all the ingredients to turn that potential into lasting prosperity.
All right. Thank you very much for coming through to the People's Space podcast.
I hope I get a free T-shirt.
Definitely, definitely. And yes, talking about free t-shirts, ladies and gentlemen, we do have some goodies for you. Not only Eric will be privileged to get his package, but of course, you can also get an amazing package that will contain t-shirts, shirts, caps. We are in winter right now. You can get yourself some hoodies, some puffer jackets, branded mug cups, and all kinds of accessories. But remember, you just have to be interactive on our platforms, that is YouTube and Facebook, under the handle the Center for Trade Policy and Development and CTPD Zambia on Twitter and TikTok. And once your comment or reaction garners more reactions, you might just be that lucky winner that we will be able to give all these amazing and fantastic prizes to. So that when you meet in the streets of Lusaka with myself or Eric, we will be donning those, CTPD and People's Space branded apparel. The name is Wenson Mavor. Thank you for watching. And today's episode was focusing on the International Monetary Fund in Zambia, some of their work, with a special focus on the Extended Credit Facility Program, which Cabinet recently extended to a period of 12 months following some of the successes that we have seen. And we are talking about the debt restructuring and all these other areas and milestones that we've seen are being achieved when it comes to restoring fiscal stability, which ultimately is the key if Zambia at all is to achieve economic sufficiency. So see you next time, and thank you for watching.